arise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, welcome today, everybody, to Monday's edition of End of the Age. I'm Dave Robbins, sitting in for Irvin Baxter today. He'll be with you on the radio tomorrow. And I've got a very interesting program for you today. On today's program, I want to discuss two topics. First, the Islamic prophecy of the end of days battle at Dabiq, which a lot of things happened over the last week and especially over the weekend. And then I'm going to let you know how the United States government is implementing the global government's, or should I say, the United Nations agenda in our society already. Now, I've wondered for years how they're doing this, how they're going to do it, how they're going to implement it, how are they going to enforce it and make us comply with this. But it's already being done. And so we're going to talk about that. And they just rolled out a big new website showing the enforcement methods, and I'm going to go over some of that in the latter part of the program, so stick with me all the way to the end. We'll see if we can't get through this today. But first, I want to mention that many of you watch us on the radio, you watch us on the internet, but I want to mention that the End of the Age is actually on television every week. We're on TBN every Friday evening from 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Time. And then we're on the Daystar Network on Sunday evenings at 11:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central Time. So for more information on other stations that we're on, go to endtime.com and click on Broadcast and then on Schedule. So again, just to make sure you remember, again, we are on TBN every Friday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Time. And then we're on the Daystar Network on Sunday evenings at 11:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central Time. And one of the things we did last week, we went through all the prophecies or the miracles that have happened since we started the Endtime Ministries back in 1986 when Irvin Baxter published his first book. And that's probably going to be a television program that's coming up real soon. But we've got all kinds of current events and different things, how prophecies are being fulfilled. And a lot of new programming coming out here real soon. So you want to check us out on the TBN Daystar networks and some other networks that you can look at. Just go to endtime.com and look at Broadcast and check them out. So it's really cool. I think you'd really enjoy it. So to begin with today, I wanted to talk about what happened in the city, the northern Syrian city of Dabiq over the weekend. As many of you may already know, ISIS suffered a major symbolic defeat with the loss of Dabiq. This was over the weekend. It comes from the Christian Science Monitor. And it states that the Islamic State has lost the Syrian city of Dabiq, a central part of its claim to be the bringers of an apocalyptic battle with the West. Many of you have heard us report on it over the last several months. The Islamic State has been dealt a major symbolic blow in the battle for its existence. Turkish-backed rebels, reportedly supported by the United States Special Forces, they seized the Syrian town of Dabiq on yesterday. And it said the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. According to the Islamic prophecies, central to the Islamic State's radical message, Dabiq is the site of an end-of-days battle that ushers in the apocalypse, what they would consider the apocalypse. Of course, well, I don't know what that really means according to them. Do they mean like when the Lord's going to come back? I mean, I don't know. We'll discuss it here in a minute, but I don't think they even really know what it means. I think it's just like a big propaganda spin for them to recruit people. Of course, that's what their Dabiq magazine is all about. It's a propaganda magazine. So let's talk about Dabiq in Islamic prophecy. What's it all about? Well, according to a saying or the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad relayed by a 7th century companion, the last hour would not arrive until the Romans would land at Dabiq or Dabiq. Many jihadist groups interpret Romans to be Western powers, namely the United States. Well, in the prophecy, 1/3 of the Muslim army will run away, 1/3 will be considered excellent martyrs and killed in the battle, and the remaining 1/3 will be victorious and conquer Constantinople, which they would consider modern-day Istanbul. Well, the Hadith and several others claim that after the seizure of Constantinople, the Dajjal, or the Antichrist, according to them, would appear, setting the stage for an end-of-days battle in Syria. And then get this, Jesus, a revered prophet in Islam, will return and lead Muslims in prayer before joining forces with the Mahdi, a Muslim Messiah figure, for the apocalyptic battle. Now, before I go on, I want to make sure you know this is not a biblical prophecy. This is according to the Hadith, which is told by some courier who did this, that, and the other. And so it's not a biblical prophecy. I want to make sure you know that right up front. We're not Christians, people who believe, that believe in Bible prophecy, we're not looking for this great apocalyptic battle to happen in Dabiq. And so I just want to let you know kind of what's happening and what's going on with ISIS, because a lot of people were kind of questioning, well, hey, the Hadith said this, is there really a Mahdi coming and Jesus is going to come break the cross, do all this other stuff? Well, no, actually not, and I'm going to explain that to you here in a second. The Islamic State first captured Dabiq in August of 2014, a victory that was met with much fanfare in its publications and social media accounts. Well, in November of 2014, the group released a video of the beheading of an American aid worker, Peter Kasig, in Dabiq. A voiceover stated, "Here we are, burying the first American crusader in Dabiq, eagerly awaiting for the remainder of your armies to arrive." Remember, they were saying the West is going to come, meet them in Dabiq, and it's going to be this final apocalyptic battle. Well, the Islamic State even named its monthly magazine the Dabiq, a propaganda magazine to recruit others to come to by their side to promote their cause. And it reinforces the image that it was fulfilling the will of God according to them. Well, in the lead up to the current battle, the Islamic State reportedly sent 1,000 elite fighters to Dabiq. Now, this was just a few days ago, and remained heavily mined and around the surrounding countryside. Well, according to the prophecy, what follows this so-called prophesied victory in Dabiq and Turkey is the appearance and final defeat of the Islamic version of the Antichrist, called the Dajjal, at the hands of the Islamic Jesus. To most Westerners, it sounds fanciful to suggest that the Islamic State believes it is fulfilling this prophecy. But this type of thinking is common among Islamists. And Al-Qaeda and its affiliates often talk about eliminating or breaking the cross. You've heard that terminology if you follow this stuff in the news. And the breaking the cross, this is a reference to the same prophecy. They're talking about paving the way for the Mahdi and the Islamic Jesus. I don't even understand that term, Islamic Jesus, but it's more their propaganda material, to bring about a final victory over their enemies. The terminology refers to an Islamic prophecy where Jesus will break a cross. He's going to come back and break a cross. This is what they believe, to disprove Christianity. In other words, to show the whole Christian community that, hey, in all actuality, that religion is wrong, and to absorb the religion into Islam. Now, this is their propaganda that they spin. Of course, all of us that recognize the prophecies of the Bible and understand Scripture know that this is a complete fallacy. It's a made-up deal. It's not a biblical prophecy. It's not going to occur. Jesus is not going to come back and break a cross and try to and tell all Christians, oh, I'm sorry, you guys were wrong this whole time. Actually, Islam is the way. That's not going to happen. But this is the propaganda that they spin. So in all actuality, though, as of this weekend, their prophecy was wrong, and the battle where they were fighting at Dabiq, they were defeated and driven out. So it wasn't a biblical prophecy, but a lot of people were really concerned. Hey, is this they were saying, this is the end of the age apocalyptic war. It simply didn't happen. It wasn't a biblical prophecy, so we weren't even really looking for anything major to happen, just another skirmish in the Middle East. Well, in all actuality, what the Bible prophesies is that there will be two major wars in the near future. The first is the Sixth Trumpet War. Now, this Sixth Trumpet War will begin in that Euphrates River region. We do know that from the prophecies of the Bible. But if it hasn't already, if we're not already fighting it right now, it really could begin at any time. You understand that the Middle East is a tinderbox, and all the major players in the world are standing around with these big blowtorches just ready to throw it in. I mean, that's all it would take for this thing to escalate to the point where it could destroy. According to Revelation 9, verse 13 through 26, 1/3 of the world's population is going to be destroyed as a result of this war. And so it's the next event to occur on God's prophetic timeline. So that's what we're watching for. It's very, very critical that you understand that. The second battle that is foretold in Scripture to happen in the very near future is the Battle of Armageddon. And it occurs at the end of the final 7 years. And the final 7 years, of course, begins with the signing of a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. And of course, this has not occurred yet. So we know that the battle this weekend could not be the end all. It could not be the end of the age, the final apocalyptic battle on earth. Simply not the case. We weren't looking for it to be because we understand the prophecies of the Bible. So we do know it is at the Battle of Armageddon. Now these guys were saying that the Islamic State was saying that the Mahdi was going to come and that the Islamic Jesus was going to come during this battle. Well, we know that Jesus doesn't return until the Battle of Armageddon. So it's at the Battle of Armageddon when Jesus will return, not to break a cross. It's a lie. But to establish His kingdom here on earth. Why? Because Jesus is the true Messiah. We know that according to Scripture, and the only one that we can look to for salvation. So it's very, very important. Once you understand the prophecies of the Bible, when all these other things come along, these other propaganda magazines and all this other stuff saying, oh, the Mahdi's going to come and Jesus is going to come back and break the cross, that's a complete lie. It's propaganda. It's them trying to spin stuff. The problem is a lot of people get caught up in that hoopla. If you don't understand the prophecies of the Bible, that stuff can almost sound convincing to the point where you think, matter of fact, there are people here in the United States that have joined ISIS. Think about that. People in Europe have joined ISIS because they actually bought into this propaganda that Jesus was going to come back, break a cross, tell all the Christians you were actually wrong the whole time, and move into the Islamic religion. People actually bought into that. And so they were going down and joining ISIS. The Dabiq magazine was a propaganda magazine to recruit people all over the world to come fight alongside ISIS. Well, of course, this weekend, like I said, ISIS was defeated and driven out of Dabiq. No end of the age war, no Mahdi, no Islamic Jesus, nobody breaking a cross. It's simply propaganda. But a lot of people bought into it. And so we want you to know the truth about really what's going on here, because if you understand the prophecies of the Bible, in many accounts it takes the fear out of some of these different propaganda magazines and all these other scenarios that are brought up. All this cataclysmic stuff's going to happen. There is a cataclysmic war that's going to happen, but we knew nothing was going to happen here with Dabiq because it wasn't prophesied in Scripture. There's no Mahdi that's going to come and Jesus is going to come break the cross. That's a complete, total lie. Now, in the next segment, the next thing I want to talk to you about is the United Nations' ongoing effort to control the lives of every citizen on earth. Now, before I get into this, I want to make sure that you know, many of you, if you've listened to us for years, or if you're in, you'll already know this about the United Nations. But some of you are always going on news stations. Our audience is liquid. I mean, it's always expanding and growing. We're going on news stations. So if you don't know this, the United Nations, a lot of people think, well, hey, it's this great humanitarian organization, and they'll go in where there's a disaster and they'll feed the sick and all these, it's just this great organization that's helping the world. Well, from its inception, the United Nations was designed to be a socialistic, one world governing body. The original charter in 1945 was written by Alger Hiss, who was a convicted communist spy, and not one word of the United Nations Charter has changed to this day. So they're still functioning under the same charter that was written by Alger Hiss in 1945. Think about that. Now, if you go to the United Nations today, there are no pictures of Alger Hiss because he was a convicted communist spy. If you ask your guide, where's the pictures of Alger Hiss, they'll look at you like, Alger Hiss? Who's that? They're not even told who Alger Hiss is, or if they do know, they're not going to say anything about him because they understand that he was a convicted communist spy and that he penned the charter of the United Nations. It was designed to be a socialistic, one world governing body. Well, consequently, I'm going to show you today how the United Nations, now you understand that we signed the Sustainable Development Goals last September. Well, I'm going to show you how the United Nations is working to control the lives of every citizen on earth, even here in the United States, where we signed a Declaration of Independence, 1776, not interdependence on the rest of the world. We signed a Declaration of Independence, but through the current administration and several administrations prior, they've got their fingers and their tentacles woven all down through our society to the point where they've signed agreements and they're already implementing the Sustainable Development Goals here in the United States. Now, I've wondered. I thought, man, I don't really know how they're going to do this. And I've been on top of it, researching and finding out how are they going to implement this? What's the enforcement method that they're going to use to get this Agenda 2030 implemented here in the United States? In most nations on the earth, they just go in and say, here's what we're doing, and people say, okay, because they're programmed to just take whatever the international community says they have to do. But here in the United States, we're a little rebellistic, and we tend to kick back a little bit and say, no, we're not going to do that. The problem is President Obama and his current administration, they're all for this. And so I want to remind you today, before we start here into this segment, I want to remind you of a few remarks that President Obama made in his speech promoting the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 last September, because it's very, very important. President Obama is fixing to go out of office. And so it's very important that you understand what kind of mess that he's got us into. Now, he's got us into all kinds of messes. But this is just one more. But this one's going to affect all of our lives if we don't somehow pull out of this mess in the future. That's really the only option. So listen at what President Obama said in his speech advocating the Sustainable Development Goals about a year ago. And it's very, very important that you understand this. So it says, this is President Obama in his speech. It is a great honor to be here to address the topic of sustainable development. Today we commit ourselves to new sustainable development goals. I'm here to say that In this work, the United States will continue to be the United Nations, partner. The question before us, though, as an international community, is how do we meet these new goals that we've set today? How can we do our work better? How can we stretch our resources and our funding more effectively? Here in this country, he's referring to the United States, the wealthiest nation on earth, we're still working every day to perfect our union and to be more equal and more just and to treat the most vulnerable members of our society with value and concern. That's why today, now this is President Obama a year ago, I am committing the United States, so he's going to bypass Congress, and he's going to commit the United States to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Our new development goals are ambitious, but thanks to the good work of many of you, everybody at the United Nations, they are achievable if we work together. If we meet our responsibilities to each other, I believe that the progress of recent years gives us hope. We know what works, and we know how to do this. So it's very key that we understand we signed a Declaration of Independence, not to be dependent on any other entity in the world that would try to usurp authority over the United States of America. We wanted to be able to live free American citizens, not to be ruled or governed by any entity in the world. But now, here the President of the United States, 1 year ago, said, we are going to partner with you, we're going to implement these Sustainable Development Goals in our country, and we know what works and we know how to do this. So now, a year later, I'm finding out how they're finally starting to implement these and the enforcement methods that they're planning on using. So let's talk about it. In September of 2015, 1 year ago, a historic new Sustainable Development Agenda was unanimously adopted by 193 UN members. It's exactly what Obama gave the speech at. The historic adoption of the new Sustainable Development Agenda, it has 17 global goals at its core. Now, many of you will already know about this part of it, but if you don't, I want to help educate you today because it's very important, because it's going to affect you and your children and all your family, all your sphere of influence, everybody here in the United States, and I'll show you how here in a minute. So there's 17 Sustainable Development Goals at the core of the 2030 agenda. Well, goal number 13 is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Under goal number 13, there are 13 targets that must be met. The first one, I think it's the second one, is to integrate climate change measures into national policies. They're referring even here in the United States, and strategies and planning. So on the nationals, into national policy, strategies and planning. So they want the United Nations, what their idea of this whole sustainable development concept was, they want every nation on earth. And Obama signed us on to this mess. And so they're saying we want to be able to implement these. One of our core goals is to implement these strategies and planning into national policies to combat climate change. Well, acknowledging that the United Nations, and it goes on to say at the very end of this, we also want you to acknowledge that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is the primary international intergovernmental forum for negotiating the global response to climate change. So it's very, very, very important that we understand this is the United Nations dictating what's going to go on. And every nation on earth, this was adopted unanimously. Nobody withheld. They all said, yes, we want to do this. They signed on. And so the United Nations is dictating what's going on, even here in the United States. So you say, well, what is sustainable development? Well, sustainable development is a catchphrase, really. Now, they won't tell you this, but this is what the real definition is. It's a catchphrase. It's used by activists and governmental agencies involved in the implementation of Agenda 21, which is now Agenda 2030. which, according to the UN's own website, is a comprehensive plan of action to be taken on a global scale, nationally and locally. So it's not just on a nationwide scale, but even locally, here in our cities and towns that we live in, by organizations of the United Nations system, governments and major groups in every area in which humans impact the environment. So every aspect of your life. The ultimate goal of Agenda 21 and now Agenda 2030 is the control by the United Nations and a future one world government of all human settlements. All of our little towns that we live in. I live in Wiley, Texas. It's a town of about, 40, 45,000 people. They want to dictate what we do in our little town. And so it's going to affect everybody. And they want to determine where you can live and what land should be used for, consumption and production of every person on earth. This is what they're wanting to do. So the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the World Summit last September, it's nothing more than the world government. Remember, the United Nations from its inception was designed to be a world governing body. So this is nothing more than the world government tightening its grip on the world. They've got their tentacles all throughout, and they're wanting to control every aspect of everything you do. So I've always wondered how they will enforce it here in the United States. Well, now I know one of the ways. And so today, on the latter part of the program, I'm going to focus on goal number 13. Goal 13 is to take urgent action to combat climate change. We'll talk about it when we get back from the break. Again, if you're watching us just in the first 30 minutes, join us at endtime.com to watch the final 30 minutes and hear what we have to say about the United Nations enforcement method of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Who would have thought it that the Berlin Wall is right there in the prophecies of the Bible? I'm holding here a chunk of the Berlin Wall. A friend of mine was in Berlin the night that the wall fell, November 9, 1989. He cut a piece of the wall for himself, twice this large. He was kind enough to cut it in half. He had read my book, A Message for the President, in which I had stated 3 years before this that the Berlin Wall would come down, the two Germanys would be reunited, and that would be the event that would mark the beginning of the one world governmental system called the New World Order.
Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME to order The Berlin Wall in Bible Prophecy.
If your radio station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the Watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the Archives button.
Well, everybody, man, there's so much to talk about in the news. I was going to talk, I had so many subjects. I was going to talk about Yemen, Russia, the heightened alerts that we've had on Russia, the cyber attacks. There's so much to talk about in the news right now. What's going on in Syria, and I'm sure we'll get to a lot of that over the course of the week. But man, it's just so hard. All of the prophecies, when we say we're truly living in the end times, I'm not just saying that. There's so many ways we can prove that because all of the prophecies are converging at the same time. World religion, world government, the mark of the beast, the Sixth Trumpet War, the efforts to move into a peace agreement with Russia and the United States and all the different, Egypt and and what's going on in Paris. There's so many initiatives to get a peace agreement signed, and all of the prophecies that are supposed to be occurring right now, they're all converging on us at the same time. It's really hard to keep up with some of it. That's why, if you ever come across, I've got so many people that send me articles all the time, and occasionally our research team here will miss one. And it seems like that's the one that may open up the key to something. And so I've had great friends of mine from all over the world that said, Dave, you're not going to believe what's happening in my country. Look what's happening here. And a lot of times that's not reported on the world stage. And so if you have something like that, let us know. We want to keep on top of this stuff because it's very, very key. We want everybody to be informed about what's going on as we get further into these end time events that are happening that are prophesied 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. So how is the Sustainable Development Goals being implemented here in the United States? Well, I'm going to focus just on one, and that's goal number 13, which is to combat climate change and its impacts. So under goal number 13, there are 13 targets that must be met. One of those targets is to integrate climate change measures into national policies, strategies, and planning. And this is going down into the local cities, not just on a nationwide scale where you might be able to hide from something. They're going down into your local mayors, your local planning departments, your local environmental departments. Now think about it. They want to control every single aspect of your life. And President Obama signed us on to this, that yes, we will comply with this about a year ago now. And so I want to know, how's it being implemented? How are they going to enforce it? Well, acknowledging that the United Nations framework, they state at the bottom of this, they're saying, hey, you're going to do all these goals while acknowledging that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is the primary international intergovernmental forum for negotiating the global response to climate change. So they're letting us know, we're going to dictate to you, you can do all these things and help us, but we're going to dictate the situation here. The United Nations isn't going to show up on your doorstep and say, do this. They're going to dictate to President Obama, who's going to dictate to the Environmental Protection Agency and all these different agencies and say, okay, now go forth and enforce this. Implement it and then enforce it. That's what we're going to talk about today. Just one goal. There's 17 major goals. So how will they enforce this global governance program here in the United States? Well, it starts with the United Nations Environment Program. The UN Environment and the U.S., now I'm going to read this real slow, I want you to get it. The UN Environment, their program, and the United States EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, they renew a commitment for a sustainable future. So they're married hand in hand. They've joined hands. It's a marriage of the UN's environmental program and the Environmental Protection Agency. They said, yes, we're going to work together to implement this sustainable future that the United Nations has come up with here in the United States. So on September 16th, yesterday, in Washington, D.C., the UN Environment Executive Director, Eric Solheim, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA Administrator, Gina McCarthy, strengthened their commitment to combat climate change, protect human health, and implement the Sustainable Development Goals. So remember, the EPA and the United Nations working hand in hand by signing a Memorandum of Understanding in Washington, D.C. The agreement identifies areas for strategic cooperation in order to address transboundary environmental issues through strengthening environmental laws, national institutional capacity, and national governance for environmental protection. In other words, governance, they want to control you. Anytime it says governance, that's control. They also want to create healthy communities. Now, some of this stuff sounds good, but it's going to be bad, I promise you. Particularly for children and other vulnerable communities, facilitating the transition towards resource-efficient communities and green economies. Responding to global challenges such as climate change, which is an utter hoax, folks. It's something that they dreamed up. They created this unbelievable global warming leads to climate change. And guess what the solution is? More government. That's the goal. So it's global governance is the goal. All this other stuff is a created propaganda scheme. That's all it is. It's a hoax. And they want to provide scientific leadership to inform environmental decision making. In other words, they want to control everything you do. The UN environment and the U.S., the United States EPA, have a history of collaboration on issues such as eliminating lead from gasoline. Some of the things they've worked on. And they'll tell you all about that because they want you to think, well, hey, this is cool. These guys are eliminating lead from gasoline. But they're not telling you about everything else they're doing here behind the curtain. And so it's really, really deceptive. So today the organizations are working together with the World Health Organization, another world governing body, to build on this success by advocating for the elimination of lead in paint globally by 2030. That sounds great. Man, take lead out of paint, awesome. Lead out of paint by 2030. It sounds wonderful. The UN Environment and the U.S. EPA are also jointly addressing critical issues such as reducing mercury exposure and promoting more sustainable patterns of consumption and production. Now, this is very key. When you're taking lead out of paint, that's wonderful. But now, right here at the very bottom, it says promoting more sustainable patterns for consumption, what you eat, how much electricity you use, how much gas you use, everything. Sustainable patterns of what you consume, whether into your body or what you use to live, and production, including reducing food waste. So they're going to try to govern the amount of food intake, and the amount you waste. They want to control every single aspect of your life because they're internationalists, they're globalists. They think they know how to run your life better than you do. At the end of the day, it's all about control. And it comes straight from the United Nations, which from its inception was designed to be a one world governing body. And it's the world government that we've talked about. It's talked about in Scripture. It's prophesied. That's why we talk about it. The Bible says just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, there's going to be a global government established. That's what they're establishing right now. These Sustainable Development Goals are one more step moving us forward into this one world governing body. That's why we're all alarmed when the President of the United States says, oh yeah, just tell us what to do. No problem, we'll do it. You got to be kidding me. We signed a Declaration of Independence. We might as well rip up our Constitution because they bypassed Congress. We might as well rip up the Declaration of Independence. It means nothing anymore because we don't abide by it. We don't even care about these things. Declaration of Independence, these guys don't care about that stuff. Globalists, internationalists, they want to do away with borders and have everybody what they want is one global nation. One global city that answers to a world governing body. That's what that's what they're creating. We do not want that. Absolutely don't want to be part of that. So, what do all of these things lead to? Every one of these activities leads towards the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's all about governance, including the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, you say, well, what's the enforcement method in the United States? Well, this is very key. And you can go look at this for yourself because it's going to involve you and me. As sure as we're sitting here, this is coming to our homes and our families, your farm, your ranch, your building in the city. It's coming. So this is very key. Go look this up. It's from CNS News, and it says the EPA launches ARC-X. It's ARC-X, or it's a one-stop climate change adaptation website. This is very key, because when you go to get a permit to do something on your land, when you want to do something with a forest or build something in the city or run a sewer line somewhere, they're going to go back here, because climate change, global warming, all that big propaganda hoax, it's been pushed so much that these people have to comply. And you say, well, I only live in a town of 1,000 people. It's coming to you as well. So it's not just the big cities. Big cities are easier for these people to control. That's why they'd like to get everybody out of the country and put them in these big cities. But it'll come out to your local towns as well before it's all over with. So let's talk about this website, this new website that's been developed. You can go there and you can look at all the enforcement methods. It has to do with 40,000 different communities as of right now. And the community leaders can go there and say, how do we enforce this? What do you want us to do? What's the ramifications if we don't do it? Including going to prison. You can go look at it. Look at the website for yourself. It's the ARC-X, the Adaptation Resource Center, or ARC-X, ARC-X. Now, I know we're coming up to a program here, to a break, and so I don't want to dive off into this real quick. But what we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm going to get through this, at least this article, before we get to the end of the program, because you got to go there and look at it yourself. I couldn't believe it. I've been wondering how they're going to implement this Sustainable Development Goals here in the United States, and how they're going to enforce it. They can tell you to do something, but if they don't have an enforcement method, you do whatever you want. It's no big deal. But if there's an enforcement method, I got to pay money, I'm going to go to jail, I'm going to go to court. What's going to happen? They're going to seize my property. I don't know. At that point, now what they're dictating has teeth on it, because they can say, if you don't do this, then we will do this. Well, wait till you go to this website and see how they're going to enforce the Sustainable Development Goals here in the United States. Now, this website's just devoted to climate change and how they're saying, like, clean water. What kind of emissions are you giving off from your factories and different things? That's what it's devoted to. And we're going to talk about this website. If you're interested, you need to go check it out. And because it's the Adaptation Resource Center, or ARC-X. You got to go check it out. And if you can't find it, email me, drobbins@endtime.com. I'll send you the link. You got to check it out and see how they're enforcing it here in the United States.
Take your understanding of the end time to a new level with our Outlines and Quizzes workbook. This workbook accompanies our Understanding the End Time 14 lesson series. As you watch each lesson, follow along with the outlines, then take a quiz and check your answers at the end. These are all contained in one convenient workbook, so you can study as well as teach prophecy wherever you go. Use it as a study guide to cement main points and scriptures that Irvin teaches in each lesson. It's also a great tool if you host an End Time Bible study. Help your group solidify what they're learning by getting a copy for each person to follow along with the video and then to take home and study on their own. Get the workbook by calling 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and be ready to instruct many as the scripture says.
Okay, everybody, so I'm going to move pretty quick through this segment because I want to get down through some of the enforcement methods that are on this website. But again, if you want to go check it out, go to the ARC-X, the one-stop climate change adaptation website. And you got to go check it out because it's showing you how they're starting to implement. This was just recently launched, how they're starting to implement the Sustainable Development Goals here in the United States. This is just one devoted to climate change and how they're going to enforce it and what they're going to do. What happens if I don't? Jail time, fines, all kinds of different things, enforcement methods. They're going to force us to do it. We're not going to have a choice at this point. So It states that in this article, the Environmental Protection Agency recently launched a new website, the Adaptation Resource Center, or ARC-X, to help leaders, now get this, of the nation's 40,000 communities with information and tools to increase resilience to climate change. I have a few hairs left on my head, and I want to pull the rest of them out when they talk about climate change, because climate change is a hoax. This whole thing is built on a hoax. It's not happening. But what they're trying to do is to implement a world governing body. So they don't care whether it's happening or not. All they need is a lie, a crisis that they can spin to get this thing implemented into society. So it goes on to say, recent statistics from the Office of Management and Budget show the federal government has incurred more than $357 billion in direct costs due to extreme weather and fire alone over the last 10 years. A press release, this is announcing it on the website. Climate change is also expected to pose, now this is all a spin. This is not me saying this. This is the EPA. Climate change is also expected to pose significant financial and infrastructural challenges to communities in coming decades. The EPA designed ARC-X to help all local government officials address these challenges, and from those with extensive experience and expertise dealing with the impacts of climate change to those working in underdeserved communities who are just beginning to meet those challenges. Well, it states from floods and droughts to other dangerous heat islands and public health effects, communities are facing the very real impacts of climate change. Remember, it's all a hoax. This comes from EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy. Well, ARC-X is a powerful new tool that can help local governments continue to deliver reliable, cost-effective services even as the climate changes. In a video on the new website, Joel Sherega, an EPA senior advisor for climate adaptation, said the interactive nature of the new site allows visitors to get information tailored specifically for your needs. It doesn't matter what community you live in here in the United States, you can go here and there's a region and you can find out what is, this website is tailored to your region, and find out what you're supposed to be doing in your community, and you can also find out what's going to happen if you don't implement it. So the website really summarizes the impact of climate change on the region you pick. And remember, it's all a hoax. It's not even happening. It's a lie fed to us by these world governing bodies. For example, you can go to the northeastern United States. Go to that region. The Northeast is projected to experience increased precipitation, more frequently and intense storms, and higher average temperatures. These projected changes pose challenges to communities as they protect water and waste infrastructure, maintain water quality, and protect air quality and public health. Many communities are building resilience to the risks they face under current climatic conditions. But no matter what region one picks, the information about climate change and sea level rise, for example, they always have this scary, oh, the sea levels are going to rise and it's going to cover towns and millions of people are going to be killed. It's a complete, total, utter hoax. They don't have the God factor in any of this. God controls the climate. He's been controlling the climate since He created the earth. But yet they think, well, mankind has put off so many emissions, carbon emissions, that we've heated the planet up to the point where the sea levels are going to rise, ice caps are going to melt, we're all going to be flooded, we're going to burn up, the hurricanes, tornadoes, everything's going to explode. And so it goes on, for example, it leads to a generic page on that topic, which you can go to on the website to check it out. The same is true if one picks an extreme heat or another area of interest, a water cleanliness or whatever, air quality. For information specific to each state, the website links visitors to a PDF explaining how that specific state is being affected by climate change. And most of the states and territories include this information. Our climate is changing because the earth is warming. It's what the website says. People have increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the air by 40% since the late 1700s. What about all the articles about the earth? We're going into another little ice age in the 40s and 50s and 60s. What about that? I guess they forgot to mention that. Other heating trapping greenhouse gases are also increasing. These gases have warmed the surface and lower atmosphere of our planet about 1 degree Fahrenheit during the last 50 years. 1 degree Fahrenheit. You mean 87 up to 88? That's going to alter the course of the oceans and melt the ice caps, right? No. But they try to make it, 1 degree Fahrenheit. I think a tornado is going to happen tomorrow. Evaporation increases as the atmosphere warms, which increases humidity, average rainfall, and the frequency of heavy rainstorms in many places, but contributes to drought in others. Do you see how crazy this sounds? And I know I'm being a little facetious here, folks, but this is crazy. This is propaganda. This has been proven easily. There are leading scientists in these fields that say these are lies. This is simply not happening. The earth hasn't warmed in almost 2 decades. Global warming stopped. And so we've flatlined. But in the last 6,000 years since God created the earth, it has went up and down. The earth, God created a way for the earth to heat up and cool down. That's why it's still here. God controls all of this. If you don't believe in God, then you come up with this climate change. Global warming leads to climate change. You can't believe in global warming leads to climate change on one hand, and believe on God on the other hand. It doesn't work like that. Because God controls all of this. He's been controlling it. God will determine whether it rains tomorrow or whether it's sunny. And He knows how to keep the earth in store. The Bible says that as long as there is time here before the Lord takes us all out into eternity, before it's over with, there will be summer, winter, fall, spring. There's going to be the seasons. And it's going to be hot, and it's going to be cold, and it's going to be working along as normal. And so it's very important that we understand this is all a hoax. The website goes on to state, and many of the states include this information. Greenhouse gases are also changing the world's oceans and ice cover. That's been proven to be a hoax. Carbon dioxide reacts with water to form carbonic acid, so the oceans are becoming more acidic. The surface of the ocean, now they're trying to get everybody into fear mode, so they'll do whatever they tell them to do. Remember, the goal, world government. They don't care about this stuff because it's not happening. All it is propaganda. You ever hear a news story that was complete, utter propaganda because there was an agenda they're trying to push? That's what this is all about. The surface of the ocean, they say, has warmed 1 degree during the last 80 years. Warming is causing snow to melt earlier in the spring, and mountain glaciers are retreating. That's not true. Even the great ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica are shrinking. I'm telling you, folks, this is not true. There are world-leading scientists that say this is not true. And then they go on to state, thus the sea is rising at an increasing rate. So for information specific to each region of the country, the website provides a link to page 841 of the 2014 U.S. National Climate Assessment, which summarizes the impacts of climate change on the United States now and in the future. It says a team of more than 300 experts, guided by a 60-member federal advisory committee, produced the report, which is extensively reviewed by the public and experts, including federal agencies. That gives me a lot of comfort. It's been reviewed by federal agencies and a panel of the National Academy of Sciences. I would love to hear some of the world-leading scientists in this field. I'd love to hear what they say. So my question was to you in the beginning, how will they enforce goal number 13 here in the United States? It's easy for them to say, to have on a website, hey, here's what you need to do. But how do they enforce it? How do they say do this or else? Well, on the website, it has types of enforcement actions. You have civil administrative actions, which they're non-judicial environment enforcement actions taken by the EPA or state under its own authority. These actions do not involve a judicial court process, and administrative action by EPA or state agency may be in the form of civil judicial actions, and these are formal lawsuits. They're filed in court against persons or entities that have failed to implement these things in society. And I tell you what, I'm going to jump to the end because I want to make sure that you get this. There are types of enforcement results. These are very, very, very key. There is civil enforcement. So basically, civil penalties are monetary assessments paid by a person or regulated entity due to a violation of non-compliance. So the penalties act as an incentive for coming into compliance and staying in compliance with the environmental statutes and regulations. So it's very, very important. You're either going to do this or you're going to be taken to court and you're going to be fined. Then you go to criminal enforcement. It says criminal penalties are federal, state, and get this, local fines. This is not just your state. This is not the state of Texas. This would come down into Wiley, Texas, where I live. And these are fines that are imposed by a judge at the sentencing. So this is not just, hey, let's just roll this out and hope everybody does it. They're actually going to start taking you before a judge. They're going to start fining you. And then also, when we get down to it, there's the criminal, when you get, so what we're talking about here is that when you talk about the criminal enforcement, it says criminal penalties are federal, state, and local fines imposed by a judge at the sentencing. In addition to criminal penalties, the defendant may be ordered to pay restitution to those affected by the violation. For example, a defendant may be ordered to pay a local fire department the cost of responding to and containing a hazardous waste spill. So get this, incarceration refers to prison time for an individual defendant. So go before a judge, be fined, and then eventually incarcerated. This is how they're going to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, number 13. The EPA is working with the United Nations to implement it here in the United States of America.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.